After 32 years of perfect reviews, you're obsolete. Linda Gray didn't even blink when she said it. Her voice was measured, rehearsed, the kind of tone executives use when they've practiced the speech in front of a mirror. On the conference room table between us sat my personnel file. 32 years of quarterly reports, commendations, spotless audits. My career in a neat half-inch thick folder. She didn't touch it. She just looked at me like it was a relic. I'd worked with Linda for over a decade. Knew the way she drummed her fingers when she was impatient. The way she switched to formal language when she was hiding something. I could see it now in the way her jaw tightened before she forced a smile. "It's not personal, Mark," she added. "The industry is evolving. We need someone who understands AI, machine learning, and the next generation of tech." Mark Rourke, 58 years old, Senior Director of Network Security at Halverson Dynamics. Or at least I had been, up until that moment. My title had weight in the building. My office had been in the same corner for 20 years, overlooking the city skyline. I'd built the company's security architecture from the ground up, the same architecture that had kept them safe through mergers, attempted breaches, and 2 separate cyber extortion attempts. Now it was just legacy systems, and I was the legacy they wanted to erase. She gestured to the young man sitting 2 seats down. Hoodie, sneakers, laptop covered in stickers. Tyler Knox, 22 years old. Fresh out of some fast-tracked Silicon Valley incubator. His smile was just a little too wide, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Tyler's going to be taking the lead," Linda said. "He's bringing fresh ideas, a new perspective. He's already been brainstorming ways to streamline operations and reduce overhead." Tyler leaned forward, elbows on the table. One of my first thoughts? We could replace most of the support team with conversational AI. Cut payroll in half. He said it like he was suggesting a new paint color for the break room. I looked at him for a long moment, then reached across the table and shook his hand. Firm grip. Steady eye contact. I smiled, stood, and buttoned my jacket. "Good luck, Tyler." I didn't argue. I didn't ask for a severance package or a second chance. I walked out of that conference room like I'd just been dismissed from a meeting I didn't need to attend. I'd learned a long time ago that the quiet exits are the ones no one sees coming. Before Halverson, before the corner office and the stock options, I had a different kind of job. Black operations, signal intelligence, cyber warfare. 30 years ago, I was recruited into a counterintelligence unit that didn't officially exist. We tracked hostile tech infiltrations, the kind that looked like nothing until they burned a company to the ground. We slipped into enemy systems without leaving footprints, built kill switches into hardware that couldn't be traced back to us. We never made headlines. That was the point. The corporate job started as a cover, a place to vanish into. After a while, it became my life. I traded encrypted servers for budget meetings, field gear for tailored suits. But habits like mine don't die. I still read packet logs over morning coffee. I still noticed when network traffic didn't look right. I was boxing up my personal effects when I saw him. Tyler, in the server room, alone. He pulled a small black external hard drive from his backpack and plugged it into the primary rack. Not company issued, not protocol. His hands moved fast. Drag, drop, copy. No hesitation. I didn't say anything. Just kept packing. On my way out, I passed the frosted glass door of Linda's office. Her voice was low, deliberate. "Integration should be complete by the weekend. We'll phase out the legacy security entirely after that." Tyler's voice answered, muffled but clear enough. "Once it's in place, no one will be able to touch it without the root key." I kept walking, didn't look back. It would have been easy to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was bitter, reading too much into a harmless conversation. But I knew the tone I'd heard. the tight, confident cadence of people who think their plan is untouchable. That night, I didn't watch TV. I didn't pour a drink. I went to the back of my house, down the narrow hall to the locked door I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a desk, a steel cabinet, and a pair of black cases under a dust sheet. I turned the key. The room came alive as I powered up the hardware. The hum of cooling fans, the green blink of status lights, the glow of multiple monitors flickering to life. Screens filled with cascading lines of code, diagnostic readouts, network maps. My fingers moved over the keyboard, muscle memory waking up like an old reflex. They thought I'd fade quietly. But I don't fade, I infiltrate. I made a show of moving on. I let my neighbors see me in a different coffee shop each morning, book in hand, the picture of a man relearning how to sit still. I walked the long loop around Lake Marion at odd hours and nodded at the same dog walkers just enough to be forgettable. I kept no patterns, took no calls, and smiled too easily when someone asked how retirement felt. The trick to disappearing is to become the kind of story people don't tell twice. Meanwhile, in the quiet spaces between sips and footsteps, the other life unfolded, silent, patient, meticulous. The ghost network woke up one node at a time. In the crawl space under my house, a shoebox tower of single-board computers, linked into a mesh I'd left sleeping for a decade. In a used bookstore's back office, a dusty router I once fixed, resurrected with a scheduled task, and phoned home. A pair of solar-charged relays I hid on an abandoned billboard blinked to life at dusk and braided radio packets into the web. None of it looked like much, just forgotten hardware humming like insects. But stitched together, it was a set of fingers, reaching into places I needed to feel again. I started with the public edges. Halverson's external attack surface had grown soft the moment they called my work legacy. DNS misconfigurations, stale certificates, dev ports that should have been shuttered, little cracks with big echoes. I slipped through a maintenance subdomain we'd deprecated but never killed, and rode an overlooked API key into the staging environment. Staging touched testing. Testing brushed up against preprod, and preprod was a badly locked side door to the backyard I built 20 years ago. The credentials Linda never revoked were exactly where I expected them to be, parked in an old service account with a name no one had dared to delete because it was bound to critical jobs. That was my handwriting. I didn't plant malware, I mirrored. A clean read-only image of traffic shunted off to my vault, wrapped in enough obfuscation to look like stray cloud noise. Packet sniffers perched on the span ports I'd hidden in the network diagram margins back when paper still ruled the conference room. A remote tap in a branch office switch sent me copies of anything tagged by a handful of curious rules. Unusual upload volume after midnight, keys with foreign entropy signatures, SSH banners that felt out of place. The alerts dripped in like rain, starting on a tin roof. Tyler's laptop spoke a language it thought no one else could hear. The first night, I watched the rhythm of his keystrokes through timing anomalies in the packets, an old habit that still made me smile. At 1:47 a.m., the staging S3 bucket bloated by 16 gigabytes in 7 minutes, followed by a purge request that conveniently failed, and then succeeded on a second try routed through a residential proxy in Bratislava. 10 minutes later, a handshake stitched itself to an IP block in Tallinn. I knew like a scar. We'd flagged that block 15 years ago, when a phantom vendor used it to siphon heat maps from an energy firm's smart meters. Different company, same perfume. By the end of the week, the pattern hardened. Night after night, encrypted packages left the building in controlled bursts. Payload sizes varied, but the cadence was rehearsed: compress, split, distribute. Whoever designed it expected scrutiny. Whoever ran it believed they would never be scrutinized. The pings traced to Eastern Europe, with auxiliary hops through boutique data centers and 2 university mirrors that specialized in open research collaboration. Tyler wasn't freelancing. Tyler was following choreography. I needed to know how Linda fit. The answer wasn't in the traffic. It was in the ink. I pulled copies of board minutes, vendor rosters, and contract histories from public filings and the private archive I built for the company when auditors got sloppy. On paper, a new line item appeared 3 months ago. Technology Partnership, Helios Integration Labs. The contract sat inside a holding company inside a charitable foundation that rented a 3-by-5-foot P.O. box in Malta and had no employees on LinkedIn, no website other than a single-page placeholder, and no tax trail anyone who cared to look could follow. If you want to hide a knife, wrap it in paperwork. I told myself anger was a distraction. It didn't listen. There's a particular burn that comes when someone erases your name from locks you forged and then invites thieves through the door. Bitter doesn't cover it, but bitterness without precision is just noise. So I did what I've always done. I tuned the signal, dial by dial, until the hiss became a voice. While scripts compiled and crawlers chewed, a memory bled through. Another company. Another board that smiled through my briefing and asked if the risk could hold until the next fiscal. We'd found a firmware backdoor seeded through cheap network cameras. Procurement balked at the cost of replacement. A quarter later, the sabotage fired. Manufacturing stalled for 19 days, the share price cratered, and 17,000 people watched their pensions dissolve into legal fog they never learned to pronounce. I remember the hollow in the cafeteria, the way sound died in a room full of humans who had just found out that retirement was a rumor. I remember thinking the only thing worse than being too late is being ignored right on time. I wasn't going to be either. I built the mirror in layers, clean and quiet. Every directory that mattered reflected into mine with hash checks that would ping me if even a comma flinched. I stitched a lattice of tripwires into the seams. Tiny scripts with no footprint to speak of, each asleep until it saw something it recognized. A signature from the Talon block, a handshake from the Bratislava proxy farm, a pseudo-prompt running under a process name I knew Tyler favored because he thought it looked like a harmless update daemon. I coded like I used to field strip a rifle. Slow hands, no waste, everything in its proper cloth. By day, I let the city wash past me. I learned which baristas chalked motivational quotes on the sidewalks and which ones wrote the daily specials, like warnings. I answered polite questions about travel plans with lines I'd practiced in mirrors I never trusted. I ran the lake loop twice some mornings, cutting my breath into even segments, feeling the weight settle where it used to when I was younger and doors opened into rooms with one exit. At night, I went home to the hum and the glow and the math of other people's greed. The tripwire sang at 2:13 a.m., a quiet chime in a dark house, followed by a cascade of green notices, volume spike on the secure archive, keys rotating at a velocity that only happens when a script is panicking, outbound streams braided into 5 separate tunnels, with a 6th spinning up as if someone got greedy. I opened the capture window and watched the river move, and I knew from the shape of it that I wasn't seeing a theft. That was extraction, and extraction always means one thing: an exit strategy. I found her by accident, or at least that's how I let it look. The Wexler Hotel ballroom was buzzing with the usual corporate backslap, the air thick with cologne, champagne, and people rehearsing their resumes in real time. I was moving through the crowd toward the back bar when I saw her, framed under a chandelier, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. Linda Gray looked like she'd just signed a contract that made her bulletproof. Next to her, Tyler Knox held court with a ring of mid-tier executives, his voice carrying over the chatter as he explained how modernizing security was going to save Halverson Dynamics millions. He made it sound like a miracle. The truth was closer to an autopsy. She spotted me before I could slip past. "Mark," she said, voice warm, practiced. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her eyes flicked over my jacket, my stance, cataloging whether I'd come to cause trouble. I smiled, like I'd just stumbled across an old friend. "Couldn't resist free drinks and bad hors d'oeuvres," I said. Tyler glanced over at me, the faintest smirk tugging at his mouth. He didn't see me as a threat, which told me everything I needed to know about how green he really was. We talked about nothing for a few minutes. The weather, mutual acquaintances, the art installation in the lobby that looked like someone melted a satellite dish. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "We should have dinner sometime?" Catch up properly. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or arrogance that made her offer, but I nodded like I'd been waiting for the invitation. We met the next night at a place called Vintner's, all dark wood and quiet corners, the kind of restaurant where business deals go to breathe before they're born or buried. She was already seated when I arrived, a half-finished glass of red in front of her. The smile she gave me was looser than the one at the ballroom. I took my seat, the candle between us flickering just enough to throw her face in and out of shadow. "Things have been running smoother now," she said after the first course arrived, her tone light but edged. "Streamlined processes, faster decision-making. Tyler's really brought some fresh energy." I let the words hang, nodding like I agreed. It was bait, and I wasn't the one supposed to bite. I asked about the integration project I'd heard her mention in passing months before. She leaned back, swirling her wine. "It's a long-term modernization plan. Cleaner architecture, more automation. We'll be ahead of the curve for years." Every sentence was polished, but underneath the shine, I could hear the hum of something hidden. The second course came, and so did the text. Her phone lit up beside her plate, the screen angled away from me. She glanced down, thumb tapping quickly before she slid it face down against the tablecloth. She tried to keep talking, but I'd already seen enough. 3 words stood out in the preview before the screen dimmed. "Final upload tomorrow night. System wipe at 2 a.m. I felt the shift before I even finished chewing. This wasn't just data theft. This was sabotage. Once that wipe triggered, the company's infrastructure wouldn't just be damaged, it would be crippled. Recovery would take months, maybe longer. I pictured factories stalled, contracts breached, stock plummeting, the signature of a hostile takeover wrapped in the chaos of a technical collapse. The kind of thing you could never unwind cleanly. I didn't press her. Pushing now would only close doors. Instead, I asked about a project we'd worked on together years ago, the one that patched a 0-day exploit before it went public. She talked easily, maybe thinking nostalgia was softening me. All it was doing was reminding me of the line between competence and complicity. By the time dessert was offered, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to hand this to the Bureau or corporate security and watch it get buried under process and politics. I'd seen what waiting does. Bureaucracy moves like icebergs, slow, inevitable, and completely useless when you need speed. If Tyler's final upload was tomorrow night, that was my window. I had less than 24 hours to cut them off at the knees. We said our goodbyes in the parking lot. She hugged me, the gesture a little too staged, and told me we should do this again. I promised her we would. Then I watched her drive away, her taillights shrinking until they bled into the streetlights. Back home, I walked straight past the kitchen, past the living room, into the locked room at the end of the hall. The air inside was cooler, heavier. I opened the steel cabinet, pulling out cases that hadn't been touched in years. The field kit was intact, concealed tools, fiber taps, bypass keys. The EMP pulse device sat in its foam cradle, the matte black casing as clean as the day I'd packed it away. I checked its charge, full. I laid each piece on the desk, arranging them like an altar. The plan formed without effort. Access the building under a false maintenance ticket. Get into the server farm before Tyler initiated the upload. Disable his equipment with the EMP. Lock the room down. Capture enough evidence to make denial impossible. Clean exit before the noise started. I'd spent my career working in shadows, but this wasn't shadow work. This was a surgical blackout. I zipped the kit closed and set it by the door. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and certain. You don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with a blackout. The lobby was nearly empty when I walked in. A lone security guard sat behind the desk, his attention fixed on a muted late-night sports recap. I wore the uniform of a night shift maintenance contractor. Dark coveralls, work boots, an ID badge that would pass at a glance. The work order in my hand was genuine enough to fool anyone without reason to dig deeper. It had the Halverson Dynamics logo, a forged ticket number, and an urgent fiber inspection request for the lower server floor. The guard barely looked up as he waved me through. The elevator ride down was slow, the hum of the machinery the only sound in the sealed car. When the doors opened, the air was cooler, tinged with the faint metallic scent of running servers. I swiped my badge, the spoofed chip inside sending back a green light, and stepped into the corridor that led to the heart of the operation. Every footstep felt deliberate. I knew the cameras would see me, but the uniform and forged credentials meant they'd see exactly what I wanted them to. A man who belonged. The server room's glass double doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the glow of Tyler's monitor lit the space like a small sun in the dark. He was hunched over the keyboard, eyes locked on the scrolling progress bar, hands moving fast. On the far side of the room, Linda paced between racks, her phone in one hand, eyes darting toward the upload screen every few seconds. She didn't notice me right away. I stepped inside, letting the door whisper shut behind me. I pulled a micro recorder from my pocket, thumbed it on, and clipped it to my chest under the coveralls. The lens above my collar button was already capturing everything. Faces, keystrokes, the exact sequence of commands Tyler was running. The audio feed would pick up every word they said. I let it roll for a full minute before either of them noticed. Linda turned first, freezing mid-step. "What are you—" she started, but Tyler cut her off. "You can't be in here," he said, half standing, one hand still hovering over the keyboard. He glanced at Linda, like he was waiting for permission to escalate. She didn't give it. I took 2 steps closer, scanning the rig. The data was streaming out in bursts, split into packets, each one vanishing into encrypted tunnels, pointed at offshore addresses I already knew by heart. Tallinn, Bratislava, a relay farm in Bucharest. It was the digital equivalent of tossing diamonds into a river and knowing exactly where the net would be downstream. I didn't answer their questions. I just reached into my tool bag, pulled out the EMP device, and placed it gently on the edge of Tyler's desk. The matte casing absorbed the light, making it look more like a shadow than a machine. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "What is that?" he asked, voice tight. I pressed the trigger. The effect was instantaneous. His monitor went black, the progress bar vanishing mid-frame. The hum of the hard drives faltered, then died. Even the LED indicators on the racks behind him blinked out like a field of extinguished candles. The room felt heavier, without the low buzz of active hardware. Tyler swore, lunging toward the equipment, but I was already moving. I stepped to the wall panel and keyed in an override on the security system. The doors locked with a mechanical click. They were sealed in. I saw Linda's eyes widen as she realized this was no accident. "Mark," she said, voice sharp but trying to hold an even edge, "we can talk about this. There's no reason to—" "Save it," I said. "You've been talking for weeks. I've been listening." Her tone softened. "Look, We can make this go away. Nobody has to know. You walk out now, and I make sure you're taken care of." Tyler chimed in, his voice higher now, strained. "You don't know what you're messing with." "I know exactly what I'm messing with," I said. My fingers flew over the tablet in my other hand, queuing up the audio and video feed. In seconds, the entire recording, faces, voices, the damning message on Tyler's screen, was streaming to 3 secured drop servers across the world. One of them belonged to an investigative journalist I'd once pulled out of a safe house when things went bad in Warsaw. She'd know what to do with it. Linda stepped forward like she might try to grab the tablet, but I was already moving past her. At the far end of the room, I triggered the internal security alarm anonymously from the control node. The building's lockdown protocol came online instantly. Steel shutters would be sliding over every ground-level exit right about now. There would be no leaving until someone with a federal badge cleared it. Tyler was yelling something behind me, but I didn't bother catching the words. I packed the EMP device back into my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked to the secondary maintenance exit. The security lock released under my forged credentials, and I stepped into the service tunnel. The noise of the server room faded behind me, replaced by the distant thrum of the city's underground systems. By the time I emerged into the night air, I could hear the first sirens in the distance. They were getting closer. I kept walking, cutting down a side alley toward the street where I'd left my truck. Obsolete, huh? Funny thing about ghosts, we were designed to outlast the living. The headlines came first. Bold black letters splashed across the morning feeds. Corporate espionage ring dismantled. Foreign backers exposed. The articles ran with photos of Linda and Tyler being escorted in handcuffs through the lobby of Halverson Dynamics, faces pale under the fluorescent lights. The reports painted them as masterminds in a multi-million-dollar scheme to siphon proprietary tech overseas. They didn't mention the late-night uploads, the offshore servers, or the fact that the collapse had been seconds away from detonating the company's entire infrastructure. That part wasn't for public consumption. The details were buried where they belonged, deep in classified filings, sealed for national security interests. The Bureau moved quickly, faster than I'd expected. Maybe someone higher up had been watching the same breadcrumbs I had. Or maybe my drops landed exactly where they needed to, in the hands of people who still understood that speed can mean survival. Either way, the machine ground into motion, and the story became theirs. I stayed off the grid for the first 2 days, letting the dust settle. When I finally turned my phone on, there was one new voicemail. No number displayed, just the old scrambled ID I hadn't seen in years. "Rourke," the voice said, calm and low. "Saw the news. Nicely done. Now disappear again." Then the click. I listened twice before deleting it. There was a part of me that wanted to call back, to hear another human voice that spoke my language without needing a translation. But that wasn't the deal I'd made with myself years ago. You do the job, you hand off the mess, and you vanish before the cleanup crew even starts mopping. That afternoon, I packed light. A single duffel, clothes, field kit stripped down to essentials, a few books, the leather-bound journal I've carried for decades. No phone, no laptop, no devices that could call me back to the world I was leaving. I left the apartment exactly as it was, dishes still in the rack, bed unmade. If someone came looking, I wanted it to look like I'd stepped out for groceries and never returned. The drive out of the city was quiet. I kept to the service roads and back highways, avoiding the main arteries that could trace my passage. Each mile stripped away another layer of noise. Traffic thinned, billboards gave way to open stretches of field, and the radio static was replaced by the hum of my own engine. By the time I reached the foothills, the sun was already angling low, spilling gold across the ridgelines. The cabin sat where I'd left it, 30 acres of pine and rock shielding it from the nearest road. I parked the truck under the lean-to, slung the duffel over my shoulder, and made the short hike up the gravel path. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the way it always did after months untouched. I set the bag down, went to the hearth, and pulled the small tin lockbox from the shelf. Inside were the fragments of the life I'd just burned through. Halverson ID card, bureau credentials, 3 different driver's licenses from covers I no longer needed. Each one had weight, a history pressed into the plastic and laminate. I carried them outside to the fire pit, stacked them in a neat pile, and struck a match. The paper curled first, blackening at the edges, before the plastic began to melt and drip into the ash. I watched until every piece was unrecognizable, then stirred the embers until they glowed a deep, even red. Back inside, I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my journal. The pages were filled with years of notes, observations, reminders, truths I couldn't say aloud. I turned to a fresh sheet, clicked the pencil twice, and wrote slowly, letting each word settle before I moved to the next. Obsolete to them. Essential to myself. I read it twice, then closed the book and set it aside. Outside, the first hints of dawn were pushing at the tree line, pale light cutting through the last veil of night. I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under my weight, and breathed in the cold morning air. The world here moved differently. No sirens, no hum of servers, no glow of monitors painting the walls. Just the slow shift of the wind through the trees and the faint chatter of a creek somewhere down the slope. They built machines to replace men. But machines don't watch. Machines don't wait. And machines don't know what it's like to be betrayed. The light kept rising, brushing the tops of the pines in gold. I stood there until the sun cleared the ridge, warming my face, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the pull of the next operation, or the shadow of the last. I was nobody again, and I liked it that way.